crisis. In normal times, you can get normal people, like Patricia Nyaundi, to lead you. In abnormal times, you need me, you need Charity, you need Bashari. So please know that while in normal times you may think we are your patients, in abnormal times we will be your rulers. So we're in good company. The second S that I like to talk about is statistics. And I think most of you know about the statistics. Just mentioning them in passing. Globally, according to WHO, 1 in 3 individuals are likely to suffer from mental health conditions in their lifetime. They say that 8.6 million working years are lost to premature death due to mental illness. In terms of the money sense, dollar, $2.5 trillion is lost, and this is projected to $6 trillion by the year 2030 to mental health conditions. We all know the statistics about suicide. In Kenya, it's 7 in 100,000 suicides, but this was a while ago. I'm sure it has increased, particularly during this time of the pandemic. The third S is the silence, that the response that many of us give to mental health conditions in our midst among our loved ones. Many of us resort to what Yvonne Adhiambo War says is Kenya's official third language, the language of silence. We would rather not address the elephant in the room. We bury our heads in the sand. And the reason for this is that there is a lot of myths that surround mental illness or mental health conditions. They are caused by curses, witchcraft, sin, not praying enough, not believing, not having faith, and other such myths. Many people still think they are caused by supernatural forces, rather than thinking of mental health conditions as health conditions. And so a lot of people think they are therefore incurable. And this brings shame to the family and to the community. And that's part of the reason for the silence. But there's another kind of silence that we also need to address, and that's part of the reason why we are gathered here today, is the silence in the law and the policy. And this manual, I had the opportunity to read through it in the late draft. It helps to point out some of those silences that need to be addressed, that hopefully Senator Kasanga's bill is trying to address in updating the law with regard to mental health conditions. The other two S's, I will not really talk about them because of time, but just mentioning the S of stereotype and the S of stigma, which attracts mental health conditions. And then the last two S's are important. Well, all of them are, but I'll pause and talk about the second last S, which I call shackled. Shackled, which is a shorthand for the human rights abuses that normally people with intellectual and psychosocial disability face in their communities, in their families, many of them tied to trees or locked in rooms for years on end. Within the criminal justice system, a lot of times you find law enforcement officers unleashing excessive violence, force in dealing with people with psychosocial disabilities, partly just because our law enforcement remains colonial and brutal and violent, but also partly because they are not trained. They don't know what to do with people who have a mental health condition. They don't know how to de-escalate situations. So today we are discussing the whole question of mental health and access to justice. So I'd just like to, in closing, just point out that as we think about the access to justice, we must think, and I'm indebted to Charity, who we speak with time and again on this issue, and also to mention that sometime last year, Kabarak University and the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. Do we have people from those two here? Okay, yes, yeah, they convened a conference on this whole question of mental health and the criminal justice system. And it's important for me to mention that so that we can move forward together, even after we launch this manual. Um, yeah, just to mention that the criminal justice system is a continuum, incorporating from, on the one hand, the community, then the police, or the arrest of the person, and then the court system, which is the arraignment and trial, and then the prison, in case the person is convicted and has to spend time in prison, then probation, and then finally back to the community. And along that continuum, you find the silences I'm talking about in law and policy, and also in practice. You find people are falling through the cracks because when the police officers arrest people, they come with a presumption of sanity, that this person is okay. So if this person happens not to be okay, for whatever reason, they're not able or trained to handle that kind of situation. So they'll behave the same way our police behave. Like the tragic case of the police officers um, uh, uh, shooting a young man who was deaf at the Dandora dam site. And when he was asked to stop, he didn't obviously hear. And they just decided these are criminal. We have that same kind of tragic actions by the police when it comes to people with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities. Um, Families also really struggling, trying to make ends meet, put food on the table. The dilemmas that single mothers go through if they've got, for instance, a young daughter who has a mental health condition, and they have to choose between staying at home with them or going to look for food to bring on the table. And that's why many of them are interviewed and say that's why we have to lock them up, because we don't lock them, they are going to be abused. And if we stay with them, we are going to starve. So those are some of the, and so in some instances, you find even families saying, we prefer them to be in prison because over there, they are being taken care of and they are being fed. But a lot of times people are arrested, they have underlying mental health conditions, but they are either not detected, and if they are not detected, they are not treated, they become worse. And so you have this continuing cycle of criminality, with an increasing or ever more serious kinds of crimes being committed by the same person. You have situations of in detention. There's a lot of discrimination in prison or in pretrial detention. There is violence both by the other inmates and by the police or prison officers, and there is isolation, and sometimes these people, even when the condition is recognized, the priority is to keep the peace. So you over-medicate them, and there's use of force to keep them docile and silent. They are not used in the activity. They are not included in the other rehabilitative activities of the particular prison. I've been a fortunate guest of the state in Industrial Area Prison, and so actually 3 times. The last time it was for a whole month. I won't tell you why, but it was interesting to be there because every once in a while you see one of those afandis come and start saying, watu wa dawa, kujeni watu wa dawa. That's what they are called. And they just come and they are given that medication, and most of them, they are like zombies. They don't do anything. While other people are playing out there or doing other things, socializing, people with mental health conditions are regarded as a problem to be contained. And those are some of the things that I'm hoping that as we read through this manual, and this manual is just a beginning to help us look through the framework, the legal and policy framework, regionally, internationally, and domestically. We hope that this will help to kickstart or continue the conversations that have been going on among an increasing number of advocates. So we are not where we were 10 years ago, but we are not where we should be. So we need to just continue to encourage one another and to ensure that um, uh, because we are told that society is as good as it treats the weakest among its members, we want to pray that our weakest link is going to be stronger and stronger to make sure that the human rights of all of us, including people with mental health conditions, are safeguarded even in the criminal justice system. I thank you.
I think he deserves another round of applause. It is still so fascinating how every single time you speak, you inspire new wisdom and renew the strength of very many advocates of mental health to do more. And the different lenses that you've put across, be it an advocate, be it a person with lived experience, I'm sure will motivate even the civil society groups to take something that you have said and do something about it. I have already looked at the question around how law enforcement engage with persons who are living with mental illness, who have mental health challenges. How do law enforcement engage? And I think, as you rightly said, it's a conversation that requires us to look deeper, and I hope that that is one of the findings that our dear consultants will discuss. But it's an engagement that we need to have with law enforcement officers, and sensitize them, because this is our community. And I thank you so much for your keynote, and I hope everyone has taken in that wonderful remark. Now, two of our consultants who are here give us different lenses. One is an advocate, and one was a person with lived experience. So the book does not take a literal approach. It's a very engaging and realistic approach to the questions that we are addressing. So it is my honor to invite ICJ's member, an ICJ former staff, an expert on various things, including also, let it not be deceived, an expert on matters of the internet, telecommunication, digital rights law, Mr. Victor Capillo, to come and share his take on the document. And he did not develop this on his own. He developed this with Macharia Njoroge. Now, Macharia, the interesting story about Macharia is that he has been one of the key focal persons in the campaign to decriminalize petty offenses, giving us the lens of the enforcement of petty offenses for persons who are living with mental illness. So you see that the two persons, their legal approach and their lived experience approach, ensure that this document is very holistic. So I invite our two consultants to take us through what the document actually contains. Karibuni sana, gentlemen. While I offered to give assistance, he mentioned he's the IT person. It's coming. Is that screen okay?
sanitizing the presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the findings that myself and Masharia were able to capture during the research. Judy, how much time do I have? The whole day?
No.
26 slides. Okay. So bear with me. So I'll just highlight. I don't know if it's visible, but we, in terms of our methodology, we conducted basically a desk study, which was also informed by key informant interviews with select individuals from state institutions and other actors within the criminal justice system, and also the medical profession. So we interviewed a couple of people who also got some feedback, which informed the findings, and also reviewed the various legal frameworks, international instruments, and other regional instruments on the relevant topic. And so we present these aspects to you now. In terms of the legal landscape, sorry? It's like a political rally. As a meal. Might be appointed a deputy very soon. But as you can see, the legal landscape is quite diverse. We have quite a number of instruments that capture or regulate an aspect of disability. But of course, it's important to clarify that the Constitution is our, as the Grundnorm, provides a definition of disability, and also provides, freedom from, non-discrimination and also equality of persons, but also talks about how persons with disabilities should be treated, and of course creates the mechanisms for oversight, including an independent judiciary, which is very critical. National security organizations who are responsible for safeguarding the rights of persons with disabilities within the criminal justice system. And of course, important to mention that persons with mental disability is also part of that definition. We have our Health Act. I will not go individually, but just to highlight the critical ones, we have the Mental Health Act, which is very important. It is progressive, but also has its challenges in terms of how issues about legal capacity. We have the Persons with Disability Act, which provides an extensive framework for the recognition of the rights of persons with disabilities, and also an institutional mechanism, and also a fund for persons with disabilities. The Public Health Act provides for public health aspects, and we know there are challenges there. The age of majority talks about, we know about legal capacity and when you're 18 and when you're not. It is a question, especially for persons with mental disabilities, that sometimes that issue of legal capacity always comes up. The Criminal Procedure Code regulates, of course, the procedures of arrests, and we shall highlight just a couple of challenges within the criminal justice system in that regard. The Legal Aid Act provides for the provision of legal aid and also establishes the legal aid service, an important institution with regards to the provision of legal aid. And we know that there are needs of persons legal aid and access to justice has been a challenge across the country. John has spoken about the challenges of persons who are detained or in custody, and of course there are challenges within prisons and hostel institutions in terms of how minors are treated, minors with mental illnesses, and also inmates who have any form of mental conditions in terms of the provision of and access to medical assistance, access to drugs, and also people who continue to stay in detention for extended periods of time without proper access to justice. And the probation and offenders, the law talks about, provides for the mechanisms for probation, and of course, even there are challenges around integration and also the capacity of the probation institutions to provide care for persons who have been released from custody. Again, under the Kenya Defence Forces and also the National Police Service, we have prohibitions against torture, but we still know that persons with mental illness continue to face these types of challenges. And then I'll just highlight the institutions. We have the National Commission who are present, the Gender and Equality Commission, which is responsible for safeguarding the rights of persons with disabilities. It's important that they also focus on mental health as an important component and address the needs of persons with disabilities, especially those mental conditions. And the Commission on Administrative Justice provides for the remedy mechanism in terms of actions of public officers. And we also know about the roles of the ODPP and the Judicial Services Act, which also provides for actions around the judicial. So that generally is, from a legal perspective, some of the laws which address some of these issues. In terms of policies, there are quite a number of policies and guidelines that have also been developed. We have Kenya mental health policy, which is the framework policy on mental health. We have the Kenya health policy. All of these are important to look at how the government is planning to address issues of mental health. We have the SJT, which is the judiciary strategy, and how it talks about how the judiciary is taking measures to promote access to justice. The bail and bond guidelines also provide standards for bail and bond, and we have the National Prosecutorial Policy, which guides the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution in terms of the decisions they make and the objectives of prosecution. The guidelines on the decisions to charge, which is also an important document, because sometimes, as has been highlighted before, persons with mental conditions come into contact with the justice system, and you have to stand trial, and so these guidelines provide an important basis. And also we have the diversion policy and the sentencing guidelines, which unfortunately a number of these are not very specific on the rights of persons with mental conditions. Again, at the international human rights level, there are quite a number of instruments that are important, and Kenya is a party to quite a number, to most of these, and they provide differently for persons with disabilities. Of course, the first and most important one is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which provides the obligations of states with regards to how they should treat persons with with disabilities, including providing a very wide definition of who persons with disabilities are, and also the standards and expectation of states with regard to providing for persons with mental disabilities. We also have the ICESCR, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The ICCPR, which also provide the obligations of states with regard to persons with disabilities. The Convention Against Torture provides that nobody should be subjected to torture, and the state should take measures to criminalize torture and also prevent the practice. The Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, also very important, because we know that there are also women who are persons with disabilities, and they also suffer from discrimination, whether it is in the justice system or outside. And some of these women with disabilities also have mental conditions, and they face additional discrimination over and above their disabilities. The Convention on the Rights of the Child talks about children, obviously, and we know that there are children also who have disabilities, and they also continue to face additional discrimination. And the Convention provides that states should take measures to address the needs of children, including making sure that they're not subjected to discrimination or exploitation, and even making sure that the best interests of the child are looked into or taken care of. We have the African Charter, the Banjul Charter, which is also an important instrument, regional instrument here in the continent, which provides generally for all the rights of Africans, and also specifically for persons with disabilities, prevention of torture, and elimination of discrimination against all persons. And also we have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which also provides for the rights of children and prevention from discrimination, exploitation, and also for states to take measures to ensure that their rights are guaranteed as required. We also have the Maputo Protocol, which is a protocol on the rights of women in Africa, also provides very similar to CEDAW in terms of protecting the rights of women. And then we have a protocol that establishes the African Court, which access to justice. You can access regional courts, and also the statute establishing a legal aid fund, which provides funding for people who seek to access justice through the African Court. And again, we have the Protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which also provides similar mechanisms to the CRPD. And one of the important things to note is that even Kenya has acknowledged that there are still challenges with respect to how persons with disabilities are provided for under the law. We have still challenges in terms of facilities for, health facilities for mental health, inadequate, capacity in terms of just health professionals who are present and knowledgeable on these subjects to provide services to the people. With respect to the justice system, we highlighted a couple of challenges within the justice system for persons with mental conditions. They're listed here, quite a number of them. The first is the limitation of legal capacity. We know that if you don't have legal capacity, then you can't make any decision legally. And sometimes persons with mental health conditions are denied. That legal capacity is taken away because you're branded as somebody of unsound mind. You cannot stand trial, so you are denied access to justice simply because of your condition. We have legal technicalities, legal provisions in the law that are problematic in nature. We have the Age of Majority Act, we have terms that take away the rights of persons with disabilities. Many people also do not understand their rights during the legal process. So you can imagine if ordinary people, people who don't have any condition, have challenges in understanding. So some people, this is a bigger challenge in terms of just appreciating the rights. We have aspects of petty offenders who continue to be arrested. We have had a number of cases where persons with mental health conditions are arrested and detained simply because the officers who conduct these arrests are not trained on how to deal with these types of situations. They can't understand that these symptoms are not symptoms of a criminal conduct, but it's just symptoms of somebody who has a health condition. So that lack of capacity to appreciate the nature of the person who are seeking to arrest find that many people with mental conditions will end up are in detention. And even once in detention, access to justice becomes a challenge, because how do you communicate? If somebody is having an episode and the people who are handling them do not know how to communicate or engage or even provide medical assistance, because we've been to our police stations and prisons. We don't have officers who are trained to understand and to help, provide not just access to healthcare, but also access to justice. There is also challenge of legal expertise. Even us amongst ourselves as lawyers, we pretend we know. We have highlighted quite a number of legal provisions, but do we know what they all provide for when these clients come to us? As judicial officers, as prison officers, as law enforcement officers, are we aware of the legal provisions, the rights that are are important for persons with mental conditions and persons with disabilities? The other aspect is about access to accurate and accessible information. Generally, we have a problem with access to information within our justice system, generally. And that is aggravated because for persons with disabilities, generally, there is a further challenge because the information is not in accessible formats. If you're blind, if you can't read, if you can't see, there are already challenges there. Then, what if you have a mental condition? How there's a further challenge there in terms of accessing information, and even accessing information about how to get help if you're within that. You've heard Njonjo saying, "What to dawa." That is how you get from access to health information, and you can see that is a challenge. We have discrimination across the board, not just for persons with disabilities generally, and we have yet to develop that. We have challenges for children who are in detention facilities and hostel institutions. The challenges around prisons also still there for children. We've seen, Jojo just talked about the exposure to unwarranted and deadly force, because our officers are not trained how to deal with these types of situations. Then we find that people continue to suffer these kinds of force, which is bordering on torture and cruel and inhuman and degrading treatment. And of course, the lack of treatment during incarceration, we've already highlighted that. And there are also challenges with respect to reintegration after incarceration. We have aspects around, John just spoke about the stigma that already exists in society just because you have a mental condition. So imagine if you went to prison and you have a mental condition, then you come back, so you have twice the stigma. One stigma of being incarcerated, second stigma is of having a mental condition. So we are seeing this is a challenge. And of course, the capacity and awareness of stakeholders to even communicate at the time of arrest, to communicate during court process, to communicate even within the facilities. If you just walk to a police station, walk to court, we don't have our officers or people there who have the capacity to provide assistance to individuals. So at this point, I will hand over to my colleague, Masharia, to come and highlight the other aspects of the findings.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you very much, Director CJ, Mr. Kigomwe, former director, and everyone. Also for the opportunity to be part of this research. Probably before I go to the mental health conditions, one thing I discovered with
respondents. It's like you could ask in the same institution, how many cases do you experience in the span of 1 year? And you could get two different opinions. Maybe because of the level of awareness, somebody will come and pass through the system and nobody detects, like Tony Jojo said. And others are aware, here there is something else to look at apart from the charges. Something else I'd also want to talk about the symptoms and the conditions that we summarized is that this is just a very small drop in the ocean. Dr. Chitai is here and he can tell you the manual that is borrowed, the Kenyans borrow and use for diagnosis, the Kenyan psychiatrists borrow from the American Psychiatric Society. I think it has around 947 pages. Is that so? Yeah, so there is very much that we could not just highlight, but why we are bringing this, just for general awareness, because these are the main symptoms that one may come across in the course of duty. So we used the general term mental conditions or mental disability because when we talk about mental disorders, it's kind of, we feel like we are putting a person in, we are holding that person responsible for being sick or having the condition. And so we are not really addressing the issue, but it's kind of stigmatizing and putting that person in an awkward situation. So we prefer using either mental health condition or mental disability. And mental disability is majorly classified into two. Intellectual disability, which is mostly congenital, a term used for, it's something that one acquires at birth. And intellectual disability mostly is visible because it also has some physical attributes. Maybe it's something that one can see. Then we have psychosocial disabilities, which is also classic. Okay, and with the intellectual disability, we also have a spectrum. There are other many types. We have autism, cerebral palsy, and others. Psychosocial disabilities come at late adolescence, or they may come at early adulthood, though there could be symptoms that could be identified early in age, but mostly ignored and mistaken for delinquent behaviors and things like that by the community. So we singled out panic attacks. Somebody will pick a microphone, then you'll be unable to talk. Somebody will start sweating all over. Somebody will start stammering, words will not come out of the mouth. And even sometimes a person may even collapse. It happens like that because of change of situation. Like for the first time you're appearing in a court of law, you see a policeman and a magistrate, and everybody is serious, stone-faced. So you're not able to cope in that situation. Then we have personalities. We have obsessive compulsive personalities. This one is mostly manifested in behavior, whereby you'll find a person repeating an exercise, washing your hands all the time, looking at whether you close your door, then going back again, leaving the door again, cross-examining, making sure that it's okay, you're safe. Repetitive behaviors, social anxiety, almost like the panic attacks, but this is something like you change your behavior immediately you are exposed into the public. It changes. You're not able to be yourself wherever you're exposed to the public. Dissociative identity personalities, some of these ones are very rare. Post-traumatic stress disorders, like we say victims of abuse, or if you have gone through a very traumatic experience like a road accident, situation of war, any forms of violence, and then you're exposed to the justice system, sometimes one is not able to cope because of what they went through. Like you're to face the perpetrator, face on, head on, and you're not given the right kind of a support. You may not be able to, and sometimes even the lawyers, it's kind of now they take advantage of that situation and really pin you down because they know you're vulnerable. Clinical depression. Sometimes you ask why a person is locked up in the bedroom for 2 weeks. The person never comes out. Lots of interest in food, lots of interest in eating, the things they used to like, and many other symptoms. Postpartum depression and psychosis, these are conditions like happen mostly to young mothers after they give birth. And they may develop a condition whereby they may even harm the child or themselves. And in most cases, you find that instead of them being given the appropriate attention, the first thing we do is that we rush to the criminal justice system. This is a killer, this is a murderer, and things like that. And then you have people with bipolar. Bipolar, okay. There's a mood situation whereby, okay, the best way to explain it is in a spectrum of between 1 and 10, whereby you could be on extreme of 1, 2, and 3, whereby the mood is very low, loss of appetite, you're sad, having a bad feeling about yourself and about the world in general. Then you could go to the other extreme of feeling I'm the president, I am God, I can achieve everything in this world. Okay? And also bipolar has its subsections also, subtypes, because like not bipolar 1, you have very many episodes. One can become very episodic and maybe dramatic. And then you have the other bipolar whereby a person is hyper, maybe indulging in many ways, in many behaviors, but not really explosive, if I may use that word. Then we could have people with schizophrenia, and schizophrenia, a person could be going through hallucinations, delusions. A person could be addressing himself. A person could be having those episodes, okay. And mostly people with schizophrenia are noticeable because it's even difficult to communicate with that person when they're having the episode. But what we need to know is that some of these situations are preventable, and if they're not preventable, they can be handled. When the person gets appropriate interventions through either medication and other support systems like counseling, given opportunities to express themselves, and their problems being addressed. Why I say that it's, we not only get well through medication and counseling, and yet the root causes have not been addressed. Then in the justice system, we find that which begins actually from the chief's office of the nearest police station, all the way to the courts, to the prisons, and now back again to the community. The society uses some of these terms like abuse or problems, unhealthy, excessive, etc., addicts, user, junkie, reformed addicts. And instead of using these terminologies, we use better terms like recovering patient, recovery from a person with alcoholism, a person who previously used drugs. You recognize the person first. you don't use the label of the illness of the chemical dependency of the substance first. Terms like afflicted by mental illnesses, suffers from mental illnesses, but instead replaced with living with a mental illness, or a person has been diagnosed with a psychiatric condition. Terms like a person committed suicide. Okay, we use terminologies like died by suicide, lost by suicide, took her or his own life. Some of these terminologies like insane, insanity, mentally derailed, and there is a time I was looking at. Okay. Coordination of stakeholders in the criminal justice system to ensure effective and responses to mental health issues in the justice system. So that one will take care of the judiciary and other bodies. I think I will stop there. All this information is in the manual, so you can read and also you can give your feedback. And thanks once again for the opportunity. I'm also glad to hear that Jojo is also an alumni of industrial area prisons. I'm also an alumni of that institution, together with Matari Psychiatric Hospital. But today I'm here because of the support and accommodations that I got from my family members and all the duty bearers, and the level of self-awareness that not only am I a person with lived experience, but today I'm also a psychologist who is pursuing his master's. Thank you.
Let's give our two consultants a round of applause. I was actually going to ask you to leave that up, the recommendations, because I want you in the room to see yourself in the recommendations. There is a role for the media. There is a role for NCAJ, state actors. There's a role for non-state actors. We have actually been called to challenge. I've seen a recommendation to civil society to document human rights violations of persons who are suffering with conditions of mental health. I think another key slide is the terminologies that you've spoken about. We are victims of the terminologies because often we have been taught how to say it from an early age of, I would say, insensitivity and the community. So we also have a duty to train others and sensitize others on the appropriate language. So thank you for putting that in the manual, and also thank you for the recommendations. So I hope that all of you can see yourselves in this and actualize the recommendations in the document. So with that, and I think with a very heavy morning, I think it's time to go for a tea break, a short tea break, where we will have a cup of tea, network with the people in the room, and then come back for a very exciting panel discussion that will now unpack in more detail some of the issues that have come up. From the medical professionals, we will hear a little bit about that from Dr. Chitai, from the judiciary and state actors, and more so the NCAJ, we will hear from Senior Counsel Patricia Nyamdi, and from civil society, and an organization that has been bringing together various organizations on mental health to advocate for various reforms within the industry. So we'll hear from Matthew. So let's all have a quick cup of tea, then come back, because this is a panel you don't want to miss. All right, so 10 minutes is okay? 10 minutes, right? I'll be walking around keeping time. Okay. Tea will be served at the balcony area on this side, towards my left.
Habari ya masiku. Good to see you. Going strong. Yes. Hadi walikuwa chama. I tell you. Later. But how is this? I have been here with you guys.
in the general comment, is stated that all persons have legal capacity inherently due to their humanity. However, we've noticed that once a person is diagnosed with an impairment, immediately the legal capacity is stripped off. So have persons with mental disability been unfairly stripped off of their legal capacity?
I was also hoping for the two microphone. Uh, not my lucky day. Anyway, thank you very much. I think this is the essence of the conversation we are having today. When I listened to Victor and Masharia, this is really what struck me. That essentially what happens is once we label you as a person with disability, what then the legal system does is it immediately switches you from being a subject to an object of the law, and that therefore any privilege or any support that you enjoy is one that the system uh, deems fit to confer upon you. So we then move away from this being an inherent right to one that is conferred upon you. So that's how the justice system is behaving, that it is conferring rights upon persons with disability. And I think this is the tragedy of our legal system, that you kind of have a paternalistic approach to justice. So yeah, the short answer then of your question is that in its current application, what the justice system does is to strip persons with mental disabilities of their legal rights. Thank you.
Thank you. So what would you suggest as the ideal situation for persons living with mental disability, considering that some may argue that they may not be able to make decisions on their own, they need some support in making the decisions when in the justice system?
Thank you. Because I'm privileged to be sitting here because of the agency where I'm at, NCAJ. I think what we can emphasize is that the ideal situation is that the justice sector agencies are speaking to each other. Because I think that the tragedy is you get medical practitioners, civil society actors who are very plugged in, but the duty bearers are still struggling because their mandate and the way they execute it is defined by law. So there's an extent to which that we need to even provide a legislative framework that then facilitates or guides or yippee classmate, I have the two microphones. I've joined that WhatsApp group. Okay. Okay. All my life I was asked to tone down. It's in my adult life that I'm being told raise your voice. Yes. So yeah, what needs to happen is an enabling legislative regime that recognizes that the responsibility of agencies who are in any way working or having to deal with these cases what they are doing is actualizing existing rights. This one. So what they are doing, is it on now? Is it on now? This is really a challenge. My mind has gone. But what I think, as the Victor and Macharia emphasized, is the first step would be to even amend some of the existing legislation or introduce legislation that recognizes that persons with disability do have legal capacity, and that where we actually feel that there are challenges, then it is possible to clearly lay out how it is then that you provide the necessary support so that they are able to enjoy the promise of the justice system. That you see, if you look at our constitution, everyone then has a right to a fair trial, and the components of what is within that right to a fair trial. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now move to Dr. Chitai. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability provides for reasonable accommodation in the circumstances where a person with disability may have been in circumstances where they're in detention. So in the case of persons with mental disability, what would you say is reasonable accommodation? What do you think is, what would you say is reasonable accommodation in a case where they've been deprived of their liberty?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Now, one has to realize that when citizens are free on the outside, they enjoy many rights, and they are able to fend for themselves, find food, find shelter, find health care, including mental health care on the outside. So once these persons then are taken in by the government because of suspected offense or incarceration due to an offense, the state then takes over that mandate of providing them with their needs, not just food and shelter and clothing, but also health care, mental health care, including, by the way, even education on health care and how to maintain good health care for themselves. Ideally speaking, detention by a good government should be an opportunity for someone to get better services than on the outside, health-wise speaking, because our hospitals on the outside do not have a mandate to provide the best health care. They may not have the capacity even. And articles in the Constitution, for example, Article 41, guaranteeing the highest standard of healthcare, sometimes are not usually enforced. They are seen to be progressive and aspirational. But when a citizen who was able to find healthcare on the outside is taken to incarceration, the state has an obligation to provide for them the best healthcare, including mental health care. With regard to persons with mental and psychosocial disabilities or mental illnesses, in the medical world, we prefer to use mental illnesses. There is some controversy about mental disorder. In our trainings and manuals, there's no distinction between disorder and mental illness, although we always try to, again, accommodate views because that's important that we get to a consensus. So for us, and also mental disease, we use those ones interchangeably. Mental disease mental disorder, and mental illness. So today I'll use mental illness maybe mostly. So mental illness, the intersection between mental illness or mental health and the law is inextricable. You cannot separate, or you can hardly separate, because in the public domain, there is a perception that persons who commit offenses have mental illnesses. And the reason is, when someone with a mental illness commits an offense, they're disproportionately covered in the media. So that's one problem. It's a problem because the perception is much higher. If you look at crime rates, only, for example, only about up to 10%, 5 to 10% of violent crimes are committed by persons with schizophrenia, which is the mental health condition where someone is likely to commit an offense. Meaning that a lot of people who commit offenses actually don't have a mental health challenge. However, coming back home to people who have mental health challenges in the society or mental illnesses, there are cases where someone with a mental illness will commit an offense either because of the illness or not. So it's not always that when someone commits an offense with a mental illness, it should be attributed to the illness. So sometimes they commit offenses outside, the symptoms of their mental illness, but it happens. So we must know that when people come into contact with the criminal justice system, they may be coming with pre-existing illnesses. 2, there are people who come into contact with the criminal justice system and develop mental illnesses due to the inadequacies of the criminal justice system. I ask myself, if you took 1,000 healthy people mentally to prison, and let them stay there for a month, take them out, measure their mental health, how many will be mentally healthy? No. It's an experiment we can't do. Because it's unethical. But you realize that some of them will develop mental illnesses due to the conditions of incarceration, the overcrowding, the abuses, punishment that is happening there, the lack of freedom, torture, and so on. It will happen. In fact, in 2005 study stated that half of persons in prisons have a mental health illness. Half, 50% of all persons. And that was reported in the Mental Health Task Force report of 2020. The committee that was chaired by Dr. Njenga and Charity was a member. 3, persons who come into contact with the criminal justice system are human beings. And human beings can develop mental illnesses wherever they are. You could be in Netherlands, in South Africa, in UK, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Zambia, but you'll develop a mental health disorder because you have a brain. So anyone who has a brain can develop a mental disease. Just the way you have a kidney, you can develop a kidney failure. We all are at risk. As long as you are alive and you have brains, you can develop. So some of these people then who develop mental disorders, diseases, or illnesses, whichever you want to use, some of them develop because they're human beings, and human beings are prone to develop diseases. And still, when they develop, even in the best prisons, you may have people falling sick when they're in prison. What must we do? It is very important that for them to be properly accommodated, one of the services that they need is the counseling. There should be generally a service where people are counseled, because coming in contact with the criminal justice system is a terrifying experience. Policemen coming to arrest you at night sometimes, and handcuffing you. Even being handcuffed just once is a problem, I mean, that is very terrifying. It can even precipitate anxiety attacks. It can precipitate even a relapse of an illness that someone had. So counseling services should be readily available for anyone who is coming into contact with the criminal justice system. 2, the trial process. How can we support them better in the trial process? A good and a proper and a functional justice system should not punish people for their mental diseases because of symptoms of mental diseases. So if an offense is related to the person's mental disease, then the person should find, that accommodation, and there should be a process. Of course, at the moment, that process is covered under the insanity defense, of which, again, there is a lot of lack of clarity, and I see that some reforms are happening in Kenya today to improve on the criminal procedure code. And then the idea of fitness to stand trial, again, that's another area, so that a person is able to defend themselves in court. So due to your mental illness, if you are unable to defend yourself within the court, then you should be afforded an opportunity for treatment and a recovery process to the extent that you can defend yourself. And that's where we, the psychiatrists, have always participated in the criminal proceedings in many cases in history. And many in Kenya and elsewhere do not understand the fact that if today somebody came to me and I declared them unfit to stand trial, it's not a declaration of innocence, and it does not relate to their state of mind when they committed the offense. That's under the insanity defense. Fitness to stand trial simply means that the person has that ability to be able to follow the proceedings. They understand what they're being charged for. They can be able to instruct their lawyers and so forth. So that's where the fitness really, what it entails. It does not mean that I see a lot of uproar anytime we declare someone unfit to stand trial. And this unfitness to stand trial is not a permanent thing. Well, for some conditions like mental retardation, it can be, but for many conditions, someone can be treated and they get well. What about if this person has a condition that they may not recover from? Maybe it's a mental illness that is extremely severe. There are extreme forms of mental illnesses that someone will not completely recover. I've had a case where someone keeps being brought for assessments after assessment, and I keep saying they're unfit to stand trial, and the cycle continues, and the magistrate keeps sending them to my clinic, and I get tired, and I'm trying to say, why don't we just release this guy to go home, really? I mean, there's no way, he'll never get to a point where is actually fit to stand the trial. And so this is part of the accommodation. So this person should not be endlessly in hospital, or they should not be endlessly be sent to for assessments. But even the process of picking someone who should go for assessment should be streamlined such that there has to be some screening procedures that go on. It should not just be on the whim of somebody that now wewe enda kwa daktari. There should be some screening process where conditions can be picked out. So the screening usually is a concept that is applied to healthy population. So you give some tool to a healthy population, and then some of them you can pick them and bring them for treatment. And lastly, what I'd like to say is also, still referring to the case I talked about of someone who keeps being brought, I think there's a breakdown in communication. There's I think a historical barrier professionally between the legal profession and the medical profession. We don't like talking to each other. There are very few forums where we can educate each other. So on either side of the aisle, there has to be some education. We, the medical guys, we need our legal capacity, not the same as what you're saying, but our capacity to understand legal issues improved, built upon. And people in the criminal justice system also need their capacity to understand mental health issues, also supported. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I'm loud enough. Thank you so much. And I'm really humbled to be here among us very distinguished persons in this panel. First of all, I'd like to, if you look at the word inmate, if you have a smartphone and you looked at the word inmate, an inmate is a person in a mental health facility and at the same time a prison. That means crime and mental health are two sides of the same coin. right? Uh, in terms of level of awareness, from the word go and in regards to justice system, I think we are still lacking behind. And that's why today we are even launching a manual in this regard. We are still behind. We are not still at a level that we should be, but we are still progressing very well, I must say. There are things, for example, that through our work we've discovered in terms of mental health awareness that perhaps if the justice system would appreciate and accommodate, then we'll be having more awareness in regard to mental health. Our work has been mostly with inmates in various prisons, and some of the things that we discovered are common characteristics from one inmate to another. One inmate to another. What you mentioned there in my introduction, what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And these are adverse experiences that happen to an individual between the ages of 0 to 17. And most of these things are the issues that create an affinity towards crime. You find many of the inmates, many of the persons that come in conflict with the law there's a study that was done by Dr. Nadine Harris. Daktari would know about this. It's called the ESCO. You find many of the people who end up in prison have an ESCO of about 8 out of 10, 7 to 8 out of 10. Any one of us here can do an ESCO. There are specific things that you answer in about 10 questionnaire. And many of the people who end up in prison are either poor, are either coming from homeless communities, are either rejected at birth, they have either a parent that is missing, there is death, something like that, there is divorce in the family, there's an element of either mental health in the family, there's alcoholism in the family, there's poverty in the family, like I said. All these things contribute towards some mental health deterioration that creates an affinity towards crime in many of the people who are in prison. And our justice system is currently not aware of that, because when you look at how probation perhaps officers assess people who come into the justice system, they don't look at them from a psychosocial or intellectual perspective. Our magistrates and our judges, few of them know about CRPD or maybe ACEs. In other jurisdictions, for example, in the US, you find this has contributed even to the introduction of mental health courts. Judges, magistrates are trained about human rights approach. They are trained about ACEs, which they apply in that other aspects of even sentencing come into play, like diversion, alternative justice mechanism, because from that angle you understand actually many of the people who come into conflict with the justice system are actually victims of something that might have happened in their previous life. If you look at people who, for example, commit gender-based violence, there is an underlying theme of trauma in such a person. Look at rape, look at assault. One way or another, you find, if you look critically at that person's background, there's something that happened to them that led them to respond or react in a certain way. And lastly, we find that our laws tend to look at crime from a very retributive position. We look at criminals as them versus us. We need to punish them. We don't look at people who commit offenses as persons that can actually be important or good people if we gave them the tools that they needed to become better people in society. So we always look at punishing people. We always look at jailing people. And more often than not, we jail people who are vulnerable, who are marginalized. We don't look at people who have abilities. For example, maybe I could mention one or two cases that we've seen that happen in our system. For example, somebody went to a club and shot a DJ. For example, such cases, how we handle such cases, if they were from the other side, they will be handled differently. We handle people who have ability, especially financial ability, differently than the way we handle people who come from poor backgrounds. That's something that also I think our justice system needs to look at and address. And in terms of general awareness in the public, right now there's a there's a heavy conversation when it comes to mental health. If you walk around, anybody will tell you, yes, I know mental health. Yes, I know what is mental health. I know what is happening. One out of three people will tell you. But I still believe there's a lot of work to be done, especially from the preventive and promotion aspects of mental health. Our budgets, for example, even the task force report brought it out, that we have been concentrating mostly in financing the curative aspect of mental health, and which was very minimal, 0.01%. But we've never gone out of our way or even to look at mental health from a preventive and promotion aspect. Right now, there are efforts towards that, which is different from maybe the European world and the Americas. You find like in Europe, 70% of their public health budget goes to preventive and promotion. While here in low middle income countries, 40%, actually below 40%, is what we put into curative. We actually do the opposite. And even the World Health Organization has even indicated that the best mix of service provision for mental health is at the lower part of the pyramid, which starts with self-care, community-based care, and it goes up and up until curative, because curative aspects of mental health are expensive. If we invest more in the preventive aspects of mental health, there's a huge return on investment. So in terms of mental health awareness, there's more to be done. If we could do like what we did with HIV, for example, you'll walk everywhere and hear about the ABCs of HIV. We need to have ABCs of mental health as well. And one of the low-hanging fruits I can say that the public needs to be taught or to adopt is the CRPD, the Quality Rights Initiatives. These are easy to learn modules to understand about issues and rights of persons with disabilities that even caregivers or the community at large can be able to address within our small spheres. Thank you so much. I think I've touched on what you asked.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. So far, what I'm hearing is the need for amendment of legislation, the need for streamlining of the process of screening of persons with mental conditions while in court, the need for the capacity of medics improved on legal matters, there's a low level of awareness on mental health. There's a low awareness amongst the magistrates on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the cases what Matthew has just mentioned. Also, Matthew had mentioned about that persons who get into contact with the justice systems are most of the time victims of trauma. So we also need to look at that. And then also we need to focus more on the preventive and promotive aspect of mental health. So I would like to hear your attitude as we conclude the panel discussion.
Okay. Should I go? Still have a break?
I think on parting shot, I would say the launch by ICJ is very timely. There's going to be a conference next week from the 10th and 11th in Naivasha. It's convened under the National Council on Administration of Justice. The general theme is towards a human rights-based criminal justice system. And one of the focus discussions is how persons with special needs and specifically persons with mental illness are addressed. I think this is an important conversation because it's bringing together actors within the justice sector, and it's hybrid, so it allows for virtual participation. I think these kinds of conversations are important, what we are doing here, and what one aims for is for us to graduate from the conversation and on to implementation. So what I think this conference and this conversation really will be focused on is how do we just move this away from just an intellectual engagement with a subject to transforming the way that persons act. I particularly am very keen to, hear contributions, because I think sometimes the challenge with some of these issues is that you have it within your allies, your traditional allies, and therefore you are not confronting the issues. You're being polite to each other and accommodative. But I think on a subject like this, when you look at the statistics, when you look at the impact of mismanagement of persons within the justice system, the, the impact of that on individuals, I think it's about time that we actually, as Dr. Chitai has said, take responsibility, because once you define this as a person that you are subjecting to a criminal justice process, then take them as they come and respond in a manner that recognizes the dignity of that individual. I think moving away, and this is one of the focuses of the conference, moving away from just a retributive approach to justice, but to one that is also focused on reforming more. Yeah, so I know that's quite ambitious, but the anticipation is that when people really begin focusing and working in the same direction, this can be achieved. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks. So it is extremely commendable that the levels of mental health awareness in Kenya seems to be increasing. There are many groups who are taking part in spreading the awareness. I'm very happy that since 2019, around mid, that went a notch higher when the president got involved and mentioned something about mental health on Madaraka Day of June 2019, which resulted in the mental health task force committee that went around the country, listening to many views of Kenyans about mental health, and made many recommendations. On the legal front, they made some recommendations of what needs to change. For example, they recommended the review of the mental health law, decriminalization of mental illnesses and symptoms, including suicide and substance use. Now, until now, there is some progress towards reviewing the mental health law. And the last I checked, it was going through the third reading. That's commendable. There's a case in the High Court on decrim of suicide attempt that will declare Section 226 of the Constitution and of the Penal Code unconstitutional. It's in court. I won't touch on it. But also, we are making some steps back. For example, the Narcotics and Psychotropics Act that 2020 that was recently signed, it has a lot of retrogressive clauses with regard to use of substances. It's prescribing harsher punishments for people with substance who are found in possession of substance, who could be patients with substance use disorders. So that's unfortunately a step back. However, I allowed the positive steps, and now what I'm seeing is that professionals in the legal profession have invited themselves into mental health, and I want to welcome you. But again, I want to ask that you should also invite us into the legal profession, or else we'll invite ourselves. because these two are Siamese twins. Unfortunately, most of in the University of Nairobi, the medical school and law school are very far. Maybe future universities should build them closer together so that we can get used to talking to each other.
Thank you. I think my parting shots will be perhaps on, since we're talking about justice, the administrators of justice, the gatekeepers, starting from the police. I think there is a need for training. For example, the implementation of the Luanda guidelines which talk about assessment, pre-assessment, before, even for persons with psychosocial issues. If the police were equipped in this assessment tool, then they won't take many people to courts, because it starts from there, the arrest. Also, number two, also decriminalization of some offenses. There are many offenses that actually would marginalize people with psychosocial and mental issues from the word go. We've heard chairman talked about an incident where a person was shot. We've had instances whereby people just are walking, maybe they're autistic, they are stopped by the police, but how they respond, it becomes an issue. The other thing would be train, of course, the magistrates and the judges. Our coalition is working on some aspects of that, and which we've received a very positive feedback from the NCAJ and the Judiciary Academy as well in regards to this. They are very, very open, even the ODPP. They are looking at finding ways and solutions toward how they handle persons with psychosocial and intellectual issues. I would also want to talk about, there's a need, especially with the mental health fraternity as it is. I think mental health globally is transcending. There's a new awakening. So mental health fraternity itself, as it has been, there is one of the key objectives of the Comprehensive Action Plan 2023-2028 by the World Health Organization is a subject of effective leadership and governance. That means we need to be very inclusive when it comes to leadership and governance issues of mental health. We need to open up doors for other sectors, a holistic approach, other sectors to come in. For example, if it's legal, if it's sports, if it's environment, the intersection of mental health, even with SDGs. Nearly all of the 17 SDGs, you'll find an aspect of mental health, so that people can sit in the same table, have the same conversations, and find solutions that, like you said, every person has a mental health, can be a victim of a mental health breakdown or mental health illness. We need to have budget lines in ministries. The same way we have, for example, the judiciary, we have HIV tribunal. The other day we opened a court in Mombasa for GBV. We need to have mental health courts, mental health and drug courts. This is a concept that is picking up all over the world. We need to go to the agriculture ministry, and they have a budget line for mental health. We need to go to the counties. Right now, only 2 counties have a mental health budget in this country. That is Kisumu and Makueni. What is happening with the rest? We need to have budget lines, not just tokens. That this budget line is there regardless of which government comes into place. It will always be voted for. Such kind of things, and they all start with the leadership. How we sit on which tables, how we have conversations with each other, and then eventually the psychiatrists maybe and the psychologists and the civil society and the judiciary can sit together, then I believe we're going to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One round of applause for the insightful presentation. Before you leave, we will give the participants around 15 minutes to give their question and comments. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Mine, I've got a couple of questions for you. I'm going to share. And very so the last question is again, we are looking at the 27 of our constitution and that's really the protection right ability. And access to justice. Now, recently we just implemented the judiciary, which for you to open an account, you need an ID number. To get into the criminal justice system, well, you don't have an ID. And anyway, most people with
address this particular barrier to allow guys with disabilities to be able to file their own cases and access the courts. Part two, um, I love that you highlighted the issue of mental assessment reports. That is about fitness to stand trial. However, we do know, guys, a lot of people with intellectual disabilities will technically never be fit to stand trial. However, there's the supported decision making Article 12. So, are we looking at a solution where you're recommending advanced directives or needs assessment rather than the mental assessment to enable someone to go through the criminal justice system? Finally, yours is easy. It's about rehabilitation, Article 27 of Rehabilitation and Habilitation, Article 27 of the CRPD, and right to health generally. Specifically, the issue of guys with intellectual disabilities. Even if you remove someone from the criminal justice system, how then are we rehabilitating them or habilitating them to ensure that they can be able to actually live in the community and we don't have the revolving door system that we're currently experiencing at Madari?
Thank you very much. I feel like she was the best student. She had a question for everyone. No pressure for the next person who's asking a question. You can direct your question.
Mine is not okay, but I'm audible enough. So mine is not really, let's just say, questions stroke comments, and it's regarding the issue around legal capacity of persons with mental disability. And I'll direct this to senior counsel. So when we talk about legal capacity, and I feel like there's been a thin line in terms of understanding the issue between legal capacity and mental capacity, because those are the two issues that people really don't tend to understand. Because if you look at our various statutes and our various laws that we have in this country, it talks about, for example, it denies people legal capacity. Legal capacity, for example, if you look at the law of succession, if you have a mental issue, then you're not fit to probably draft a will. If you look at conveyancing, you are not fit to transfer property. If you look at elections, you're not fit to run for office or to vote when you have an issue with your mental health. But my question is, how do we define the threshold when it comes to legal capacity? Because I feel like that is a very vague area. Because when somebody says you have a mental health issue, because just to take us back, if you are to define what mental capacity is, it's the capability of making decisions. Everybody here can have mental capacity to make a decision. And sometimes maybe your emotions or something might cloud you to actually not make the right decisions at that particular point in time. But that does not mean that me as a person, when my mental capacity is clouded, then my legal rights are actually derived from me. So my question is, when it comes to some of our laws, I feel like this is something that we need to revisit, because unless I am a minor who requires a guardian's directive in making my decisions, I as a person who has a mental health issue or a mental health disability, what is the threshold? What are we looking at? If, for example, maybe I've been declared bipolar and maybe I'm on my medication and I can function, does that actually disqualify me from gaining or actually performing some of my rights? So I feel like that is an area that we need to look into. So how do we, moving forward, how are we able to look into, determining the legal threshold, or rather the capacity of people who have mental health disabilities?
Thank you very much, Lynette. Okay, before I come back to this table, is there any other table that I feel like they're being champions of this table.
Hello, my name is Charity. Yeah. My name is Charity Muturi. I have general comments for the day because this is the only opportunity. So I think the first thing I'd like to comment is there has been the discussion of special courts or a mention, and we did recommend as a task force to have mental health courts. and a lot of civil society were not happy with that recommendation. But I feel there is silence where we need to discuss it, and then kunungunika where it doesn't really have impact. And so it would be interesting to see the various heavy hitters like ICJ and NCJ being into the conversation. I remember, speaking to some prison officers, and many of them had also said, yes, we do need special courts. And after the back and forth, we were like, how about we have courts for special needs offenders? And for prisons, it is terminally ill, elderly, persons with disabilities, foreigners, pregnant women, mothers with young children. But then the special needs group at the at the NCAJ is a bit different. There are some that are left out. The court special needs offenders are also not, so there is need for harmony. But my point is that we need to have a conversation about it and move forward. The other thing is that I think stakeholder engagement is constantly being spoken about, recommended. For this last 5 years of being in meetings like this, it's recommended, but I don't really see it happening. And I think one big stakeholder is the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection, particularly National Council of Persons with Disabilities, as has been asked about the IDs for court. In the same way, persons who are with mental illness, who are homeless, imprisoned, abandoned in every psychiatric facility, who are untraceable and unidentifiable and do not have IDs, we are not able to register them, whether for National Council or NHIF, and they've both refused, because we went with the Probation Department and Madari to ask for special registration processes, which they refused by virtue of not wanting to register aliens. The Ministry of Health recommended DNA or biomedical models of storage of identity, but it has been refused so far. So we need your help as ACJ, as NCJ, and the many other partners that we have here to push that, and especially through the Ministry of Interior and the Registrar of Persons. And the issue of rights and responsibilities. I feel there's a lot of push to enable rights, but not enough to work on the responsibility that is needed. And I think that is why we have a lot of arguments as to whether we should have involuntary admission, rights to fertility, and so on. Because our environment, especially in the public health system, where I usually see as a patient of Madari, a lot of families are already being disadvantaged. When patients start saying, it is my right, and sometimes they're not even aware of the right. It's just one of the symptoms that we always become very inspired when we are sick. And so we have people in and out. I have a friend who's been in and out just in the last 6 months, 7 times because of that issue. So I think we need to discuss the responsibility of those rights, the responsibility of preparing our environment for change, the responsibility to include the people who are most affected in those conversations. Thank you.
Pete, your question will still stay. Don't worry, I'm happy to. I want to come to this side. I saw a hand up. I want to have equality in the room, literally in the room. Which is yours? All right.
My name is Mary. I know. So I don't have a question per se, but I just have a comment. And one of the things I would say that every day it's such a forum. For me, it's a learning experience, because a lot of times outside there we do not discuss issues of mental health. So one of the things I learned today that panic attack is actually a mental health issue, because I've had that experience before, to a point that my physician sent me to a psychiatrist. Okay, of course I refused to go, so I don't know whether that was also a mental process. But I was able to recover. So I see quite some huge tasks ahead of us. One, because looking at the justice system, I feel like we are looking at the inmates, because I've worked in the justice system. I've been in the prison, and I see what happens, especially for inmates who have mental health. And I've seen, prison officers actually get attacked, and because they do not know how to handle these inmates. So I look at the system, and I think one that we'll have the issue of budget, because then if the government does not put any budget in terms of dealing with mental health within the justice system, then we shall be, talking. And then the other thing, of course, infrastructure, that do we have the necessary infrastructure? And the other thing is training of the justice players, so that then when this person makes their way to the prison, then the prison officer, who is well trained in terms of identifying, especially during the searches, can easily identify that this person has a mental health issue, and then they know how to handle the patient. The other thing, of course, hiring of experts within these systems, so that then we have experts throughout, that if we have, for example, a hospital within the prison, then we have an expert who can actually help in terms of treatment and in terms of just ensuring that these people are well taken care of. So then that means that a lot of advocacy work has to come into this. We all know how the government operates. So then we will have to do a lot of advocacy to ensure that this is actually come to pass, so that then we are able to deal with the issues of mental health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. I am very encouraged that a member of the Fifth State wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
So, because we are pressed for time, I'll have him ask a question, Pete, and then we'll go back to our eminent panel.
I'm Biambo Nyote. I'm Francis Ode, Straight News TV. I'm an investigative journalist. Now, I'm here because of a few questions. The first one is for the coalition. It's because of journalists. Now, do we have, as a coalition, do we have numbers of probably when it comes to issues of mental disability? If you have, what are you doing about it? Because there's the issue of a journalist being sent for a story. Let's take an example of Dusit. People have been blown their heads, and then anakuja is taken to another story. After that, he files the story, is taken to another story, and there's no counseling. You're given a story after another. So what is the coalition doing about that? Do we have some way of working on that? Because some of us, we go through that, and at the end of the day, you need to stand in front of a camera and smile.
Thank you very much for your question. I think your question tied in with mental wellness for persons who are working on the front lines, be it journalists, even civil society actors, human rights defenders. ICJ led a program looking at mental wellness for persons, for human rights defenders who are working around human rights issues. So more often than not, we're busy championing the rights of other people, fighting for people, ensuring that they realize their rights. But who's fighting for our rights? How often do we take a step back and see how what we go through, the gruesome, sometimes heartbreaking conversations actually have an impact on us? So I like the question, and not only could we pose it to coalition, I think we could streamline it across the board on that one.
Thank you, Julie. Mine is actually not a question. Just wanted to have a comment. My name is Pete from Crime Support. What I wanted to share actually ties in with what my brother here has asked about the trauma we face in our line of duty. At Crime Support, we deal with serious defilement issues, crime issues, and stuff like that. And I know for us, it's been a challenge, especially working with young people. Majority of my staff is actually under the age of 25. So the thing is, the interventions we should have both individual as well as corporate responsibility. So at Crime Support, what we decided to do deliberately is to have wellness officers. We have 2 on staff, and we also have a consultant wellness officer outside, who any of us can access at any given time. And I think those are the kind of factors, if we look into, then we'll be, addressing some of the issues that members of staff face within their work environments. Just to thank the panelists, and my senior Jonjo. There's something Jonjo mentioned about his life. That most of the awards he won, or most of the achievements he actually made, were after he had been diagnosed as bipolar. I want to share with you guys that I was in committee for 18 years. And I went to committee in 98 when there was lots of torture and prisons were inhumane. And I'm proud today to stand here and share with you that the person who helped put an end to torture in committee was actually a person who had mental health issues. It's this guy here. The details as to how he did that, you'll read it in his book or his memoirs. But I just want to share that we have to demystify the issue of mental health. We need not stigmatize anyone because of that. I have my eldest brother has actually had mental health for about 40 years. And we live with him. He's an engineer by profession, but George is a normal person to us. So let's live our lives as normal as we can, and let's support the cause. As Mary Aira said, we have to go out there and make the necessary noise to mainstream the issue of mental health. Thank you.
I think let's give ourselves a round of applause for very engaged conversation. I think everyone had a question. Unfortunately, we couldn't ask all the questions in the room, but that's a sign of engagement. So let's clap for ourselves. And that was a break to give our panelists time to collect their thoughts on all the hard questions that have been asked.
Thank you. Although they were framed as questions, my impression is that they were also, like comments and views and answers in themselves. One plus that we have as a country is the kind of constitution that we have. Our constitution really provides basis for many of the things we're talking about here. The other thing, just listening, is that historically, and this might be just be.
I have, it might be personal to me, but I feel that our society is set up for us not to challenge and question. So especially once something appears in our statute books, we sit with it. So if the law of succession says if you are a person of unsound mind you cannot write a will, we say yeah, that's what the law says. If the Election Act says you cannot vote if you're a person of unsound mind, we just agree. But our constitution now forces us, especially when you look at the principles upon which that constitution is framed. So for instance, non-discrimination. We are all human. Some of the accounts we keep hearing about the experiences of persons with mental illness within our justice system would be completely unacceptable if those were visited on the people we choose to describe as sane. So I think that is a starting point to question many instances. Many times we design things, the designer designs something for their use. So when you are sitting up, you're just, you design for yourself. So you say, if I'm thinking, how do I, because the ID issue, I have heard it's a way of securing the platform. I am IT illiterate, unlike Victor here, who shows up as an ICT expert. I am completely illiterate when it comes to that. But I heard it said that the ID was to ensure that you're securing the platform. But that is me seated here and saying single identity is through an ID because that's a unique identifier. So I suppose then the question would be, in instances, why I feel we need to be encouraged. I think it's KHRC that had a big push for a community that had stayed for generations without IDs, and people have just come to accept it that the Makonde are they would not get registered until somebody challenged it. For the longest of times, we just assumed there are two genders, male and female. And if you showed up with the other gender, you were a problem. Yes, but now the National Bureau of Statistics has included that marker in the census. Why somebody made a problem about it. So I think the encouragement here is that increasingly what's emerging in Kenya is that this is not the law of the needs and the passions. It's not cast in stone, and there is always opportunity to revise and reform. I think once we identify and I think this is why these multi-agency, multi-sector conversations are very important, because sometimes people are just talking to themselves. You're saying, "Oh, let's have a digital platform for filing." Call together lawyers, say, "What do you need when you're filing X, Y, Z," and then that's it. So that I think is an important point, and it's really administrative. So I think that's something that can be addressed. I thought the question on legal capacity versus mental capacity is the crux of what we are discussing here, isn't it? Like, and some of this is for us also taking the history of these issues to mind, because these laws were written at a time when issues of mental illness were highly stigmatized and little understood. And so we just had this assumption without knowing that by the time we diagnose you with having mental illness, the assumption is that you then are not functional. And that is the space people are coming from. So I think increasingly, as Dr. Chitai and other medics share their wisdom with us, and although you said it with tongue in cheek, I feel that increasingly as other knowledge comes into legislative work, the richer our laws will be. Yeah, because so for instance, and you look in all the statutes, we just say persons of unsound mind. What does that mean? It does not benefit from the medical interpretation of what mental illness is, so that if you transfer that, the medical interpretation of some of these terms that we are just bandying around, it would enrich our laws. Charity, I think I'll take as homework the issue on special courts for mental health, because I also come from the women's sector, so I'm being very cautious about this, and I have seen sometimes when you are very quick to set up a parallel process outside the mainstream, you then kind of isolate this issue. And I am just wondering whether this is the approach we would want for mental illness when we are talking about a statistic of 1 in 3. So if you take that statistic and say even 1 to 3 of persons appearing before the judicial system, this could be an issue. Whether you are talking about having a separate process or building within the justice system a level of capacity that ensures, like as Njonjo set out the entire continuum of the justice system from point of contact to point of release, whether you are making sure that at every stage you are having the appropriate response and management. So that's why I said that's my initial reaction, but I'll take it as homework. And this is under CBC curriculum, so I will expect that you will help me. Yeah, the student never does their homework alone.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll start with the last question. So about frontline workers during the COVID pandemic, when health workers were labeled frontline health workers, everyone became frontline at some point. There was a claim that every work you do is frontline. However, there are those traditional ones: the police, firefighters, media practitioners, health workers ourselves. They come into contact with very traumatic situations, and the question is, what support can they get? How does that work affect them, and so on? So my opinion is that professions, to an extent, are like countries, and countries have boundaries, and it's assumed that a country knows what is best for it. Okay, at some point you find countries invading others for some reason or the other. Sometimes there are serious problems that another country has to come in. But generally speaking, they are fashioned that way. The legal profession has its boundaries. The medical profession has its boundaries. Of course, we are saying, okay, open some of these boundaries so that we can have more conversation. It's a good thing. When it comes to solving problems, however, it's the profession to identify their problems and try to find solutions, and they can incorporate other professions who can help them solve the problem. Practically speaking, with regard to the media, if the media practitioners identify that there are certain mental health issues that need to be addressed, it is because research generally is about interest. So people research what they're interested in. It's very difficult for someone somewhere in Moi Teaching and Referral Hospital, who is maybe doing some research to suddenly become interested in the media. There has to be some reason why they are becoming interested. For example, I got interested to do mental health literacy because I've always been close to media and I have an interest in media. That's why I did it. I have a long-standing interest. So there has to be some interest. And you cannot force interest also. So the best way to do it is for that to be spearheaded by people in that profession, whether it is the media or the police or firefighters and anyone who is in a profession where they think there are mental health challenges. With regard to, what was the other question? So there was this question on intellectual. The question that came from Felicia. So Felicia, to be honest with you, the answer is I don't know. To your question about what do we do with people with intellectual disability, intellectual, who may not improve, I don't have a good answer and a perfect answer. But what I can tell you is that for intellectual disability, there are also levels of severity. So you can have mild, moderate, or severe. So people with mild, in most cases, will have that capacity to stand trial. They'll have that ability in most cases. Again, it's case by case. We don't have a blanket. Even someone with schizophrenia, it's not necessarily that they will not have that capacity to stand trial. It's case by case basis. And so, as the severity increases, that capacity may decrease. And there may be a point where it's not there. So if it's not there, and it is an illness like intellectual disability, we don't expect that to improve because there's no treatment for intellectual disability, as it were. There are management protocols and so on, but there's no treatment that can improve the cognitive, the learning and memory aspect of the person. So, unfortunately, but remember, this person is in contact with the criminal justice, so they have committed an offense. Where do we take them? Do we take them back to the community? They'll be killed, maybe. We don't know, The best decision will be to give them an absolute discharge. Let them go, because at the end of the day, we know that due to their condition, they have no mens rea whatsoever, and also they don't have the capacity even to stand the trial. So the best will be to discharge them, but to where? So there's gap. And that's where the criminal procedure code should fill in and tell us what should we do. Should they be held somewhere for a certain period of time, awaiting to be discharged to the community? So, I mean, if you have some ideas, I think the process is still going on to reform the criminal procedure code, and that can go there. So that's my advice, or opinion rather. And then lastly, some wise person said that those who ignore the lessons of history are condemned to repeat the mistakes of history, in those words or paraphrased. So the things we are trying to do here in Kenya, and this is in regard to what Charity says, have been done in the West for 4 decades. So these conversations we are having about a human rights approach, a lot of it has been done in the West. Those guys have learned the lessons. Probably if they were to do it now, they wouldn't do it the same way. What am I saying? In the West, mentally ill people were confined in asylums. So the only hospitals were like Madare, all over the place. So when the movement for a human rights approach became strong, the asylums were closed down, and it was said that let these people be treated in the communities. And the communities were not prepared. So then what happened? A lot of these people then ended up in prisons. So my question is, because for me, from where I sit, I think a transition is inevitable. We must have a transition to a human rights approach and a system that respects human rights. My question is, will the transition be smooth? Will we repeat the mistakes of the West? Will you close Madare, then those patients end up in prisons? Those are my questions, and we must ask ourselves. And lastly, just my challenge, that anybody who is interested, genuinely interested in dealing with issues of mental health, please be seized of the practical situations. So if you have an organization, take time, visit the hospitals, come to Madare, look at what is going on. You could speak from an abstract point of view, then you could push for a change that becomes worse than the previous situation. So my advice is, this advocacy is very good, but let us be seized of the practical situations. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I think I'll start with the first in, first out, or last in, last out. Yeah? I'll start with Felicia and maybe tie it with what Dr. Chitai has talked about. At the end of the spectrum, what do we do? Where do we take persons, even if it's an issue of diversion or rehabilitation? Where do you take them? Especially when we talk about community-based forms of rehabilitation and reintegration or recovery. One of the models that we've seen being applied globally, and it's gaining traction, is called a clubhouse recovery model. What does it do? This is a community-based center for persons who are coming from psychiatric facilities and prison. And it's a day community center whereby they come, they meet, they learn soft skills, they learn how to apply jobs, they reintegrate softly. There is no medication there. They meet, it's just a center. Kenya today, for example, has about 120, I think, youth facility centers. We can use such youth facility centers to apply these models, for example. The other thing is to introduce other sectors or agencies into the court process. Like I've seen that it happens in the US, for example, when it comes to the mental health courts. They work together with the rehabilitation centers, yeah, in that they are vetted properly. For example, I think they fall under NACADA here in Kenya. They're about maybe 100 or 50, or maybe those are the people that are involved in the acceptance from the courts of these persons with psychosocial issues, and then they rehabilitate them, or maybe they take through them through a process of therapy and so on and so forth, in partnership with the probation officers as well. That's something I've seen that it's working in the US, and it's growing very fast. I think that's something we can either try or even take the approach that senior counsel has mentioned, capacity building before we introduce a parallel system. I think in terms of that one, Felicity, that's the much I can say when it comes to rehabilitation. The other thing is about disabilities. All the journalists ask, we don't have, there's a data, I don't know which disability you mean, but there's a data that is lacking out there because either of resources or people have not attempted to capture that data, that information. There's some information that we need to have in this country that we've not been having. As a coalition, we've tried to do some mapping here and there, but more often than not, we are limited by resources. And I believe in due time, these data will be there. And I also know that at some point we partnered with ICJ and did some I've seen a lot of psychosocial briefings going on here and there. Perhaps you've not had the opportunity, but I believe in that context is what can lead or build up to even having mental health champions in workplaces, so that within amongst yourself, you can even build peer support networks that can also build your resilience amongst the profession. And I also think that more often than not, policies in many moments where there's a revolution, for example, now I would call this a revolution in mental health, you find that policies tend to follow practice. It comes, laws tend to follow some applications that happen that way. We can see it with Safaricom, the way they have done it in the communication sector. They've started M-Pesa, then laws had to be created, policies had to be created for M-Pesa, which were never there. I believe even in this era of mental health, we might not need perhaps to wait for policies. Like Dr. Chitai says, we might need to come up with solutions that later on will come and make laws and policies that will support those solutions because they are practical, they are working, and so on and so forth. Let me just briefly talk about the lady you mentioned about budgets, where would the budgets come from? In my interactions, for example, in the prison system, you find like we have so many guys who are arrested for petty offenses. In 2018, I don't know about now, because by then would go most of the time to Jamhuri prison, which tend to hold a lot of petty offenses. Jamhuri prison, I think, for those who know where it is, you'll find that most of these offenses would attract a fine of 200 shillings. I think 200 shillings. And if you don't have 200 shillings, you're jailed for 2 weeks, right? Petty offenses. I don't know by now, maybe due to inflation, the fine has gone up to 300 or 400, I don't know. But let's do a small calculation. This guy is arrested for a fine, is jailed for a fine, for lacking fine of 200 shillings. What is the overhead cost of maintaining this guy in the facility per day? How much? 200? 200 at the moment. I think 200, 300, maybe due to inflation, again is about 400. So this guy is in a prison for 400. He's been fed 400 daily, 400 daily, 400 daily, yeah? For 2 weeks a minimum. And these guys are about 10,000 of them, or 5,000 of them. For example, the other day, the minister says we are releasing, 5,000. So 5,000 per day at 200 shillings per person. How much is that? About 10 million per day the government is spending. Is that the right maths? Times 200. A million, maybe a million. If there are 10,000, our prisons right now have about 50,000 persons in total. And you'll find like about 30,000, they need not to be in prison. So if you're spending that much daily as a government, does it mean, are we still saying we don't have money? We can direct some of these funds to other needs which are more important. These guys can be non-custodial sentences. can happen. Alternative justice systems, those we talk about them, those mechanisms. These guys don't need to be in prison for one day so that the government need not to spend that money. But again, it's a bigger conversation, the whole system, the whole machinery, but there's money. If we really want to look for it, there's money and it can be found. Thank you so much.
The answer that you may give may be practical to the problems that we have. So we invite persons, people who have interest, to come to the table and discuss how we can make our system better, both from the practical side, from the legal side, from history side. So let's all work together. I know that there are some current legal reforms that are happening, particularly in the parliament space. And as we get into the juicy part of the day, which all of you came for, I'll invite Imelda to just give two, 3 comments on what Parliament is doing around the issue of the day.
Thank you so much, Julie. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For those who didn't catch my introduction, my name is Imelda Achien. I'm the Chief Executive Officer to the Parliamentary Association, which we call COCAS, that promotes the UN Sustainable Development Goals and business. Our aspect of business is actually social responsive business. And so last year, the COCAS embarked on mental health as one of our focus areas. And from that, we started an initiative that was known as Fungua Roho. It was amplifying political voices for better mental health services. And from that, we've been able to push mental health amendment through the support of Senator Kasang and bringing other legislators to support her, because there was the back and forth between Senate and National Assembly. And eventually, at least you can see Senate passed it, National Assembly passed the amendment bills, and now it's back to Senate for it to now just proceed for presidential signing. We also tried to intervene with the Narcotics and Psychotropics Amendment Bill, which Dr. Chitai said, and it was a bit of a challenge because sometimes there's state interest for the, let me say, in quotes, greater good. So that one we lost, but there's always opportunity to bring it back. And so we are looking at bringing it back through a bill called Harm Reduction Bill. Harm Reduction Bill is basically going to be a bill where persons who use drugs can be looked at how they can be supported to access help. The challenge right now is a lot of people attribute mental health probably to drug use, which is not really the case because of lack of proper awareness. But there are also those whom are actually as a result of drug use. In that, I mean, depression, anxiety and all that, it can lead to a lot of drug use. And it's both ways, one can contribute to the other. So it's never really practical. But they currently they're facing a lot of challenge within the legal sector because, for example, if let's say we have rogue policemen and they're looking to make some extra money. So it's very easy for them to time the clinic when the people who use drugs are going to get the alternative medicine, injections. They just time them and they arrest them and they say, oh, yeah, tell us your supplier. Tell us the one who supplies you with cocaine or heroin or weed. So that has been a challenge. So with the harm reduction bill, it's going to create ways so that there is a safe means of treatment and access to health, and then other methods which might come in or maybe might be accepted at diversion. We're looking at pushing alternative justice systems, and this has worked in other countries. So we believe that Kenya will be also emulating these and promoting human rights. Another thing is that Senator Bishiro Halake had started on the suicide decriminalization bill. So we hope that it can be picked up, and we hope that that can happen in case she doesn't come back. But we hope that she can come back and that this can go through, because within the remaining time for this parliament, can assure you it's not going to be possible for someone to start a bill and complete it right now. So we'll be looking at your support in the next parliament also for us to be able to push this at an earlier time for it to be achieved. And then there's the issue of medical cannabis bill. Matthew Mutiso is a comrade. Yes. Legalization or decriminalization of cannabis. That is also an area where there's a lot of controversy. Few MPs are willing to support, but because of the stigma around it and how their colleagues will refer to them, they are not really vocal. So we need your support in terms of helping and amplifying their voices. You know, just encouraging them and reducing stigma generally within the country for them to be able to push on with this medical cannabis bill, or rather decriminalization of cannabis, because there are a lot of gains from it, and if properly regulated, then it will become any other resource within the health and economic sector. For us, we participate in reporting for the SDGs annually, the progress report at the UN, and I can tell you that some of this data is actually never captured, or really the government can't report itself where it's not doing well. So for example, we have, yes, they normally say that, and in fact when you make the report, they know SDG 16 is on peace, justice, and strong institutions. Those things, so guys, let them not add those things that we are hearing. You know, they pass, then they drop and they hear. They call it, those guys, let them not put those things there. So the government can't report itself. So maybe you can invest in the shadow reports, because for one, there's normally a place where we monitor suicide, we monitor mental health through the number of suicides, and they will actually not report it as it is. And also just saying that number of suicide per 100,000 population is not sufficient enough data for you to monitor the state of mental health for a country. We need more diverse data. And then also there's a part where we normally report on number of unsentenced detainees. Interesting. The Prisons Authority, I think they're not willing, they're not willing to volunteer the exact numbers. And through that, we can be able to actually tell or interrogate the reason why we have so many detainees who have not been sentenced. Probably a number of them are suffering from the mental illness, and that is why they've not been there. And now Mathare has become their home permanently, because they are no longer property of the justice system, and they're also not a property of the health system. So they're just stuck and hanging in between there, and their families have also seen them as a burden, because once you're either a criminal, you're a criminal with a mental condition, then you know they look at you as a double problem. So they would rather let you stay there. So I think there's a lot of things that we can partner on in the future, and we are glad that the judicial sector has also picked up this. So I think all of us are on board, and let's work together. Thank you.
That was a wonderful invitation by the Parliament to work together. It's rare. So CSOs in the room, take it on. Let's channel all our advocacy through Imelda. But yes, I think one thing that you've mentioned is the various legal reforms that are being undertaken in regards to mental illness. And noting that we wear different hats, I think now wear the Criminal Justice Committee hat. I know that in the Criminal Justice Committee of the National Council on Administration of Justice, we were actually in the process of creating a criminal justice bill that would also address some of the various issues that have been looked at in this room. So I think what I can hear is that there's need for a lot of collaboration, because we are all pulling towards the same direction, just in different quarters. So I think we will share our bills at the appropriate time, and then have a discussion around harmonization, so that we push for a very strong bill that amends some of these laws, but also creates protection mechanisms for other persons who are in the criminal justice system. With that, drum rolls, we are now approaching the launch of the book. We have spoken about a book that you have not seen. We might not have a book altogether. We might have called all of you here and discussed a manual that does not exist. So we will finally have an opportunity to launch the manual. And I would like to call to the dais, that's the dais, the panelists who are with us, so senior counsel, please come to the dais. We will have Dr. Shitai at the dais. We will have Matthew coming back to the front. We will have our keynote speaker coming to the dais, and of course the executive director, to officially launch this Access to Justice manual that we've been speaking about. So, Santana, if you want to guide your guests into a spot that they should stand, and also stand with them as the author. We will have Masharia and Victor also join this group and take photos. So, I hope the media, you are positioned well. You can see them, they are not a block. All right, so we will do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wow. So that's the book, and that's how it looks. All right, so a few photos will be done. All right. Susan? Okay, so just stand there. They're taking photos. We promise you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I want everyone in the room to have a copy of the book, and then we'll all pose with the book. So I'll ask the team at the back where the books are. They've been safely here. They've been listening to the discussions. to distribute the books.
Oh, no.